The source of the Nile is not necessarily in Uganda at Jinja. It is under dispute. We do not know where the source exactly is, whether some say it is in Burundi, others say it is in Rwanda, others of course say it is in Uganda. So in that case, even the question has never been resolved. But otherwise, the major Nile, White Nile, which begins from Jinja here in Uganda, I think Speke was the first European to see the source of that. But there had been whites in Uganda, but not at the source. Incidentally, it was mistakenly called discovering. In most books in the past, they used to say Speke discovered the Nile, as if he was the first human being to see the Nile, when actually he was the first European to see the Nile, but the source of the Nile, but not to discover it, because he was even shown the source of the Nile by the Africans here. But in a derogatory way, there had been that misnomer that Speke actually discovered the Nile, which is not true. He only was the first European. Because if you use that nomenclature, then that would mean that the first Ugandan also to see River Rhine there in Europe, he did discover River Rhine, but they don't say that. So the other one is the derogatory to say that Speke discovered the Nile, far from the truth. One of the reasons or factors that brought the British here was to control the source of the Nile, because the source of the Nile was the lifeline to Egypt. And the British wanted to control Egypt and the waters around Egypt because it was the route to the Far East. And so if another power, say France or Germany or whatever, happened to control the source of the Nile, that would have meant that the British interests in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea would be jeopardized. So they had to hurry and make sure they control the source of the Nile. And therefore, for that matter, the source of the Nile was of strategic importance to the British in their colonization scheme, not only for Uganda, but the whole Nile Basin and the Middle East, which would be a sea route to the Far East. The British decided to leave Uganda for very many reasons. Others internal, others external. The internal ones is that there were struggles in Uganda, although they didn't go to war. The Ugandans didn't fight for their independence, but the Kenyans did. And there was the Mau Mau War in 1952. The other countries in Africa, like Algeria, fought the French. And there were other struggles elsewhere in Africa and in the whole world. But the external factors is that after the Second World War, Britain came out of the war injured. It actually, although with the Allies, they won the war, British economy came out very much devastated. And the USA now became the world power. And on its heels, the USA also became a world power. And in 1949 also, China became a world power on its own. These factors combined with the UN and these other countries like USA were struggling, were demanding that the colonizing power grant self-determination to their colonized world. Not so much that they liked these people, the colonized world, to be independent, but because they also wanted Britain to stop its monopoly so that the Americans could also trade with these countries. So there were demands by the UN, and especially the US, for this self-determination. What is happening in the Nile Basin and the Nile Basin states is actually, I think, what one scholar one time called the tragedy of the commons. I think that the Nile Basin countries are haggling and quarreling and conflicting over how to share this common resource heritage. The population pressure has increased. The need for the Nile waters has increased because now there is need for power, that is hydropower. There is need for water for irrigation as well as feeding the animals. And therefore there has been a necessity to use the Nile waters or the Lake Victoria waters. And this has intensified because the water has become scarce and the hydropolitics has now become more complex, as much as the whole region of the Nile Basin is actually, to a certain extent, water insecurity. But Egypt has got more water insecurity than the rest, and that is why it is more aggressive in defending its interests. But definitely the other countries also have felt the need to also dam and use the Nile waters for the economic purposes, and there is more economic need today than it was before. The sooner they realize that River Nile is a common property heritage, and that to utilize the common property heritage effectively, you need to come to terms with each other. You need to have mutual agreement, not to make uncoordinated statements, and not to use threats of any kind, but to enter into dialogue, realize that the agreements that were made in the past in 1929, in 1959, and the others between the British and the Egyptians, between the British and the Italians, between the British and the Belgians, are no longer applicable 70 years down the road, that they need to be renegotiated, that there is need to review these agreements on a round table under a common institutional arrangement framework, so that you come up with new laws and maybe an institutional framework that would govern the common property resource, which is the River Nile. And it's better to do it amicably, otherwise we do not want to have water wars. The hydropolitics need to be played in a cool manner and in a diplomatic manner, rather than threats and counter-threats, because if we do that, we shall have forgotten that there are other global interests that are interested in the Nile Basin, because the Nile Basin has got strategic minerals that the Americans and the Europeans and the Japanese and the Chinese want. And they can come in and use the same divide and rule that they used at Bahrain in 1884-85, that they used during the 20th century to divide the Africans, that they used during the Cold War period to divide us, so that they utilize our division in order to reap heavily from the strategic resources that are found in the Nile Basin, which actually are increasingly being discovered. There is now oil discovered. There is uranium in this, and many other minerals within this region. And therefore, these strategic minerals are going to attract other powers who are likely to come in and complicate the situation. So the people of the region should work under the framework of the AU and Pan-Africanism to resolve their conflicts and to accept to enter into new negotiations and review their relationships in an amicable manner under certain rules which all the players should agree to abide by.